thank you for the invitation. I'm very happy to be with you, and very much looking forward to this conference. And actually, this is my first my first online presentation. I cancelled several of my conferences in March and April, but I decided to join this conference, and I'm very happy to be here. Well, here, that's the point, because yesterday my son asked me, "Dad, are you going to a conference?" I said, "Yes, it's a conference in." Where is it? And I said, well, it is, because normally I tell him that I go somewhere, and this time I'm not going anywhere. Actually, I am staying at home, and I am at home, but I am nevertheless, I am very happy to be, well, here, there, anywhere, nowhere, with you. As Adriana said, I will be talking about inequalities in Poland, and actually it's not about inequalities, it's about, it's not directly self-perceived access to socially important goods like wealth, power, prestige. What I'm doing in this paper is it's a twofold kind of exercise. The very first one is to see how the objective, so to say, social structure affects and influences the subjective, self-perceived access to wealth, power, prestige. And on the other hand, I am also interested in the dynamics in time. I'm using the Polish National Election Study data, and actually the paper, I sent the paper to Adi a couple of days ago. So some of you might have read the paper already. I will skip some parts of the paper because I would like to be as brief as possible, and then I am very much looking to the discussion, actually. So I'm skipping actually the theoretical part and all the lead review, and I'm concentrating on the research questions and hypotheses. Actually, there is a couple of questions that I'm asking. The first one is, well, people are different and they are differently equipped with this access to resources or goods. And my question is whether this objective situation has any impact on the subjective, on what people think about their access to these goods. So I think that this is the most important question of mine. Do people objectively better equipped are at the same time subjectively better equipped with these goods? And I am also investigating the dynamics of that. I have data from 1997 and 2019, so I can compare these 2 points in time in order to see whether there is whether the situation is stable or maybe it is not. And yet another thing that I'm investigating in the paper is the question of the correlation of the scales. People we ask them to place themselves on these scales, and then of course these scales might be more or less correlated. I think that my hypothesis actually is that they should, in time, this correlation should go up. The hypothesis is basically that these scales have gradually anchored in the social structure, and the relationships between these scales have strengthened. This is the hypothesis, and I am. These are the hypotheses, I would say, and I am testing this hypothesis, as I said, with the Polish national election study data. The dependent variable, actually plural variables, are the scales which show the self-perception on the scales, representing access to specific socially desirable resources. So wealth, influence, or power, status, or prestige and prospects. I will show you the instrument in a second. And then the explanatory variables are the, I would say, usual suspects. So the 6 variables describing the social status, basically: sex, age, education, place of residence, employment, and marital status. And the variables are dichotomized in order to, for the sake of clarity of argument and simplicity of the simplicity of interpretation. So I'm using well, a bunch of several types of techniques. I will show you only it's a simple OLS regression on which where I regress these 6 explanatory variables on the dependent variables on the independent variables, and I actually investigate the effects and the differences in time between these effects on the dependent variable. So it's from the methodological point of view, it's, in my opinion, it's quite simple, and this is the instrument I want to show you in order to give you. Well, I want you to see how the instrument is constructed. So every respondent is actually asked to place himself on these 4 scales. It's pretty easy for the respondents. The don't knows or missing data are, well, it's a negligible number. It's a couple of %. So people basically can place themselves on these scales, and these scales are, and they make sense in a way. This is the distribution. Actually, these are the means in 97 and 2019. As you see, we as a society, we went up in a sense because we feel, we think we have more wealth, more influence, or more access to wealth, influence, prestige, and better prospects. As far as the dispersion on these scales are concerned, you see an interesting pattern. In the case of wealth and influence, it went up, and we are more dispersed. But in the case of prestige and prospects, the variance is lower. Now I'm moving on to the distributions and correlations. Well, I see a similar pattern in 97 and 19. However, the relationships in 2019 are stronger. Both, whatever we take, the correlations, the reliability analysis, the Cronbach alpha, or factor analysis, it is clearly one factor behind the 4 scales. So there is one hidden sort of factor which actually explains. In 97, it explains more than 60% of variance, and in 2019, this number increases to 70%. So it seems that these 4 scales are strongly intercorrelated. Basically, to put it simply, people who think that they are they are wealthier, they are also more influential, they have more social prestige, and they have better prospects. When I move, as I said, I skipped some of the bivariate analysis. What I'm showing you here are these simple models. What you see is the 97 and 19 models, so different data. In the case of wealth, we see quite a similar pattern. The only difference is that gender, which was not statistically significant in 97, is significant in 2019. In the case of power, the situation is more nuanced and is different. Age loses its statistically significant impact, while place of residence and marital status gets they become statistically significant. Gender does not change its impact. As you see, also the variance explained goes up from less than 6% to slightly more than 7%. In the case of prestige, the situation is more complex because the variance explained is quite low, and the strongest in 2019 of this of the variables is the marital status. It seems that the thing that has the strongest impact on our feeling of prestige is whether we are single or not, which is, from my opinion, well, in my opinion, from my point of view, extremely interesting. It tells you a lot about our society, and this is something new. Actually, it's a finding in my opinion, because I didn't know that, and since I found it, it is puzzling me. So I am looking forward to our discussion, because some people might have some explanation to that. Okay, prospects. This is easier because it does not change that much, with the exception of employment of work. In 97, it didn't have an impact, and in 2019, it does have an impact. Sorry for speeding up, but I'm looking forward to the discussion. So I'm talking fast, and I'm going fast. So let me move on to the conclusions. Okay, it seems that those people who objectively are better equipped with these resources also feel better equipped. This is quite trivial, but we have the empirical evidence behind it. The other thing that is important is that this access to socially relevant goods is going up. It increases over time. This is also a kind of fun finding that I like. And I think it's an important finding. It tells you a kind of it's interesting when you want to see the transformation, the last 30 years in a longer, more general perspective, so to say. The four scales are increasingly interlinked. So it seems that not only objectively the social structure is more and more embedded, anchored, and less stable, less dynamic, but also it's the perceived access to this socially important goods is more and more interlinked. So it seems that there are people who are up in the hierarchy, and there are those people who are down, and their access to socially important goods is more and more interlinked, and the scales have converged in the last 20 or something years. The impact of age, education, place of residence, and work is trivial. The impact of gender is more nuanced and less obvious, and I think this is also a very interesting. It's a trigger to discuss the position of females in our society, because it seems that at least in some aspects, it is actually, the situation is worse than 20 years ago, which is quite interesting. And as I said, for me, the most fascinating is this finding related to marital status, or to the couple status, so to say, because it's not marital status it's also the informal marital status, so to say. So it seems that for Polish people, for themselves, being single is nothing good. If you are single, you think, don't be offended, the singles, please, but this is what the data tell us. It seems that those who are single perceive themselves less prestigious. It's not a good phrase. They access to prestige is, in their own eyes, much lower than those who are in a couple. So I don't know how to explain that. I'm looking forward to our discussion. Plus, the other thing that is quite interesting is that this prestige scale is only weakly related to social structure. There are some interesting statistically significant effects, but the variance explained is very low. It's below, it's about 3%. So maybe there is something that is deeper in our society that needs to be investigated, and this is something that I intend to do in the next months and years. Thank you very much. As I said, I don't know how much time I spent, but I hope it was less than 15 minutes. So thank you very much for this presentation. For having this possibility to present my work, and I'm looking forward to the discussion. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We have time. The next session starts in like 20 minutes, so we have a lot of time. So I will encourage you to address questions. So if somebody feels already prepared to present a question.
Yeah, I have a question. Thank you, Mikołaj, for very interesting presentation.
Good to see you.
Yeah, it's really good to see you. Well, my thinking is that, of course, that's the tool you were using, the electoral, the survey to study the elections, and in this survey tradition, we're interested in the answers given by respondents. So it's taking an individual person as a unit of analysis for many obvious reasons. But this finding about the differences of self-perception of prestige between people who are engaged in couples, yes, members of couples and singles, it's interesting because it's driving me to the conclusion that maybe actually the proper unit of analysis here should be a household, or, well, either household, either family. Well, it has to be discussed, yes, but not an individual. So then if the household is small, it's containing just one person, the resources are smaller, and then the scales on which it could advance on these various hierarchies are harder to be achieved. Maybe could you comment on it? It's opening avenues even for broader considerations, I think. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Can we just Adi, shall I answer immediately, or do you prefer?
Previously, because we didn't have too much time, we gathered the questions, but now
I can gather the question and then answer them all. Well,
so let's gather two questions.
Okay, good.
So if somebody feels like adding something to this discussion. Okay, so maybe then I can. I'm not good at measuring like social structure or the dynamics of inequality, But I was just wondering, maybe this regarding the single, that maybe this is like a reflection of the projection of the society, that it's like the pressure we feel from other members. So even, you know, I can imagine that even if I go, I improve my status on the social ladder, but this will always be an element which people around me, they see about me that I'm single. So maybe it's not my problem. I mean, I think, but it's also the perception of how the society is judging me.
Okay.
Because
okay.
I have the feeling, I mean, this is just like a private research that I know a lot of singles, and I think at the individual level, the problem of being single today, it's resolved. It's more what they perceive is the perception of the society. So I think maybe it might be how the society, you know, perceives them, like a metaphysical justice, that they received access to some social goods, but still they are. So this is just an idea. So we can answer, and then we can gather some other questions.
Okay, so I will start with the first question. It's actually
maybe can I add something? Hello, Mikołaj, nice to see you. I wish
nice to see you.
If I can just add to what Adi was saying, because I was also thinking about this the result you received about single women, and I'm not very surprised about the way they rate themselves in terms of prestige, I think you said, because I guess in our society, Polish society, which is quite traditional, independent single women are not very, well, I don't want to say, well, you know, this is not something society tries to encourage when it comes to women to become single and independent. It's rather reverse. And with the current political climate and political government, which highlights the role of family and husband and children, this is not something, you know, I'm very surprised that single women see themselves as less prestigious and having less possibilities or options than married women. So yeah, and what Adi was saying about the answer as a reflection of wider views, I would totally agree. And I would say that, you know, we know as sociologists that what society thinks tends to be internalized by individuals, so it's interrelated. Just a comment rather than a question. Thank you for presenting interesting results. Thanks.
Thank you.
May I add a question?
Yeah, of course, of course.
Thank you. Thank you. It was really interesting. My question is just to the major result when you show the slide of this increase of self-perception, and at the same time the differentiation of the between the scales is more consistent. So I would like to elaborate a little more about the concept that might be behind these four scales and what is really measured. You definitely explored more on that topic. And secondly, what is your, well, do you have any data in between this long period of more than 20 years? That's the other. So what is the dynamic? It is difficult to draw on just on the two time points. And finally, do you see the result of this consistency that somewhat people is better established or do not see inequalities as so vigorous? Does it reflect the perception of inequalities or not at all?
All right, Adi, if I may answer, because it's actually it's getting too much. I don't know where to start, but I think I will start with the Michał, with the Michał question. Well, questions actually. Yes, we have more data. We have 2001, which is quite similar. It's somewhere in, well, it's much closer to 97 than to 2019. So yeah, the idea would be probably to add this data also to the picture. For the sake of simplicity, I wanted to show you just 2 points of time. The first one is 97. I'm not aware of someone using this instrument, this tool earlier, but maybe I should investigate this issue more. The question about the mean and the standard deviation, actually, it makes sense because in 97, both distributions were actually skewed towards the low end of the continuum. So there was little time, so to say, for dispersion. Now we moved up. So, well, it's not a logical necessity, but it makes sense that the dispersion is greater, it's bigger than it was when everybody, especially in the case of the influence power scale, everybody was actually at the very low end of the scale, because in 97 everybody thought that they did have very little impact on the public affairs, so to say. So it also from the statistical point of view, it makes sense. Now, and the third Michał questions was the one about this hidden dimension that is behind the four scales. Well, the four scales, and especially the first three scales, are, well, so to say, they are well anchored in the literature and sociological theory. Giddens, Stompka, they talk about but also Dahrendorf. There is little doubt that there are in the, so to say, social game, we compete for wealth, for power, and for prestige. There are, well, according to Göran Terborn, there are two more important resources. These are education and health, but they are directly related to both wealth and power. And we know that the correlation between both education and health with influence and wealth, money, it's quite strong. So as far as I understand, you are asking me about the kind of conceptual interpretation of what is behind, and I think that this is basically a kind of this hidden dimension is a kind of scale which can be perceived as a class scale. There are people who have more and they are up, and there are those who have less access to these socially important goods and they are down. It is quite normal, according to many who study social structure. This is something that actually should happen in societies which undergo transformation like ours, and also the growing correlation between the scales between 97 and 2019. It's not so surprising, because as the social structure anchors and embeds it's grounded, so to say. The correlation between these scales should be stronger. So I don't think that well, in my opinion, this is not surprising. It's actually showing that that the revolution or the changes that started in '89 actually they had an impact on social structure, both in the '90s and still these processes are going on in our society, at least in 2019. Of course, it is interesting from the political point of view, for example, because it seems for me that some of these processes were not stopped, even though the policies implemented after 2015, the aim was to actually or slow down, or in some cases even reverse those processes. The law and justice politicians, they talked about the reconfiguration, the restructuring of actually the redistribution of resources, not only social prestige. So I think that this is quite interesting that this agency after 2015 had little impact, in my opinion, on these macro level processes that were started in '89 or even earlier and are still going on. Now, because I talk too much, I know, I will go to this, to Ivona's remark. Well, the thing is that we are talking here about all the singles, not only single women. That's very important. That the effect that I discover is not the, well, it's an interesting point, by the way, to see whether there is a interaction between being a female and being single. That would be an idea. And of course, I do agree with the micro logic that you described. In this sense, I also agree with what Adi said, that there is yes, indeed, there is a pressure from outside. And you personally, you can be completely all right with your single status, but you go on Sunday, you go to your mom, to your dad, and they ask you about your wife, husband to be. They ask you about the potential children. They ask you about settling down, blah blah blah, all these things. Yes, this is quite. It's this kind of pressure is also well, I know about it from the qualitative data. Actually, at my institute, there are two or three projects that are run actually, in which actually Paula Pustulka will be presenting something in the afternoon, I believe. So this is one of the projects. When we see that in terms of well, having a couple, there is a lot of pressure from outside, from our social milieu, and probably, well, I have no doubt that Ivona is right, that there is this impact of tradition and the axiology of our society. Basically, this is the way we are. This is the way we this is what we think about a good life. Good life means life with someone, not alone. And this is, I believe, something that we see and that we actually are socialized to this model since the very beginning. I bet already in the kindergarten, this model is, and there are studies. I don't remember the names, but there are studies which show that this traditional, so to say, model, family model, is implemented at the very beginning of our education. And last but not least, Mikołaj Pawlak's idea of investigating not individuals but households. Well, it is interesting. Actually, it's a fascinating idea, but I see some drawbacks, and of this approach, because what would be the micro logic behind it? If I live with my sister and her husband, 3 of us, so there is one couple in the household. Do I feel? Do I place myself higher on the prestige scale because there is a couple close to me, next room? It does not. I see some. Well, it needs further elaboration, and I'm looking forward to our, I hope, soon meeting in which we can discuss this, because on the one hand, it's fascinating and appealing. On the other hand, this micro logic behind this this approach is puzzling me. But I would like to thank you all very much for the comments, for the questions. Very inspiring and thought-provoking. Thank you very much.